Do you remember what it was like to be a teenager? I do. It was awkward. Whether it was balancing my friends, my social life, trying to think about college and school, the pressure of performance, there was a lot going on. And the reality is, there's a lot going on for our teenagers today as well. It's a crucial time. It's a time of independence, curiosity, self awareness, and conflict. And parents with teens, they often find themselves having to navigate this new developmental milestone with some rebellion. The teenagers are going through a world that can seem chaotic, peer struggles, college prep, blossoming into an adult. And that's why today we're really blessed to have Sister Munira as a dean. Sister Munira is a professional college and career counselor. She loves helping young adults gain self-awareness to prepare for higher education and beyond. In fact, she's actually written extensively for various Muslim publications and websites on issues of parenting, family, and marriage. She's actually the co-author of Positive Parenting in the Muslim Home. That's actually a book that we've looked at quite extensively in a really, really good read for every Muslim parent. She actually did her bachelor's at UCLA and got her master's degree in counseling from California State University in Fullerton. With that, I'm really excited to welcome Sister Munira. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. Thank you so much for having me.
The pleasure is all mine. So diving right in, what are some of the common complaints or struggles that parents experience when it comes to teens?
Ooh, such a big question. I mean, I work with teens. That's kind of the realm I'm in, and I really do love teens. I think what we see when we enter these teen years is either, like you said, this conflict where parents are like, oh my God, my teenager isn't what I expected them to be, right? Or I want something more from my teenager. Or we have some, families that have strong relationships, and we're seeing this blossoming, and we're seeing this, mentorship that's happening. So yeah, common complaints, the typical stuff of my teen sleeps too much, or their room's a mess, or they just seem so disorganized, or they don't know what they want to do when they grow up. Those are like just the typical kind of teenage complaints that are just normal, right? Like teenagers, as you said in the introduction, are going through a lot of changes, a lot of self-development. So of course it's messy. And then unfortunately, there's some families that are struggling with bigger issues, right? Like big things are coming up, things like rebellion, like addiction, like, risky behavior, academic performance that's, lacking. And we see that there is some kind of disconnect happening in the family. And what ends up manifesting in these teenage years is kind of a reflection of the type of parenting and the type of personality this child is developing.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's complicated.
It is complicated. I can appreciate that. And I feel like there's a lot to unpack in what you just said. And I'll tell you, I think that young people get a bad rap for being like apathetic, where it's like they just don't care about anything. Come on, man, get excited. Like, where's your emotion? And also, what is very real is that they're growing up in an environment that is almost foreign in some ways, with Snapchat and TikTok and like completely ultra connected. So anyways, I want to take a step back. Munira, when we think about the teenage years, what is going on developmentally for a teenager?
So much. I think that's why it is such a complicated, time. The brain development that's happening for a teenager at this time is almost the same as what was happening when they were toddlers, right? There's so many synapses and so much, the plasticity of the brain is changing because of experiences. And that's what's happening when they're teenagers. Their brain is literally growing, right? They're literally trying to synthesize information, trying to, figure out who they are. The big, statement I say is teens are on this journey to figure out who am I, where am I going, and how will I get there? Like that's the existential kind of, self-analysis, self-awareness that is trying to get developed at that time. So imagine with all of this growth that's happening and a brain that's not fully developed, because this brain doesn't fully develop till they're about 25, right? And so most teens are kind of reactionary, right? Their decision making isn't based on rational kind of thought, because that prefrontal cortex is still developing, right? So it's a balance of that with a lot of emotion, right? It's like you'll ask a teen, like, what were you thinking? And they'll be like, I wasn't thinking, like they were just kind of responding, because the brain is going through so many changes. Peer groups, right? Peer pressure, right? Academic expectations, right? And then trying to figure out, where am I going? Because high school is, 4 years, and those 4 years go by so quick. And figuring out their interests. What do I like? What don't I like? What do I want to do? So imagine all of that happening in this short window, of like 7 years or so. It's a lot, right? So they feel overwhelmed. They feel just overwhelmed. And so as parents, it's like, we sometimes have these expectations that they're adults, right? They should know better. They look like adults, they're taller than you sometimes, but they're not. They are still developing, and we have to have compassion and mercy with that.
I want to add to the conversation and kind of underline, bold, italicize one of the things that you mentioned. With newer kids, we do most of our research on 4 to 9-year-olds. However, on the topic of belonging, we've done work in older age groups. And what I became aware of was this prefrontal cortex, which you mentioned. So the prefrontal cortex, as I understand it, not a neuroscientist, but this is the area of our brain that allows for high order thinking, the ability to think into the future. Okay. Now, this prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. And like you mentioned, that gets fully developed by the time we're 25. So now imagine for a moment something happens at school. There's a rumor that is spread about you. Okay. And your prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. Your ability to think long-term into the future is not completely developed. And you have this happen. It's not so foreign to then think, oh my gosh, this is the end of my life. This is it. Like, oh my gosh, my life is over, right? And so if a teen were to react in that kind of a way, as an example, you can appreciate why, given their development of what's happening. And by the way, that's why we believe, on belonging, we can talk about that in separate day, separate topic. This is a really sensitive age group where if they don't feel like they belong, it can lead to, consequence. Now, Sister Munira, you mentioned, mashallah, like so many of the various items that, a teenager is going through. I mean, what is a parent to do? Are there kind of, principles or high level strategies that parents can use to, communicate or build relationships with their children at this point in time?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that's the key. I love what you just touched upon, because belonging, that is key to us as human beings. But teens want to also feel like they belong in their family, right? And so part of this communication that we want parents to build with their teens is the sense of they feel like they can talk to their parents. They feel like they can actually communicate what they're thinking, feeling, deciding. Some, basic principles when we get to the teen years, right? As parents, we really need to focus on connecting with our teen, making an emotional connection before we focus on correction. Because many times we'll see parents that are like, this is wrong, that was wrong, I need to fix this, I need to fix that, or they, constantly correcting the teen. And that really creates disconnection in that relationship. So if we really want to have an influence on our teens, we have to start from this place of building connection. And that's already started from when they were younger, right? And so that's where, if you have that foundation from when they were younger, the teen years may not feel so, turbulent. But if you haven't, and now there's this pushback because something's not working, right? This teen is becoming an individual, which is normal. They're trying to figure out who they are, which is normal. And so sometimes if there's a disconnect in that relationship and communicating with the parent, then we have conflicts. So it's our job as parents to focus on connecting with our teen. even when it's difficult, even when we're like, they are very unlikable right now. That's what we do, right? We can still hold boundaries. We can say, I love you, even though I don't like what you're doing. That's that kind of connection of this is still a safe space. Home is still the place you land. So that's one principle or one focus I invite parents to kind of approach their teen with is connection before correction and seeking to understand your teen's perspective, not to judge them, not to lecture them, not to, not to correct them, but to really seek to understand. Because really, when I talk to teens, they really just want to be understood. Once they feel understood, then we can go into a space of, okay, let's problem solve, let's collaborate. So connection is my first principle. My second principle is, as parents, pick your battles, especially when it comes to the teen years. Like I said, some parents have multiple issues that they're struggling with their teen. Some parents may have one or two, but we sometimes get overwhelmed. We have a limited amount of emotional energy as parents. You can't focus on everything. So as a parent, you must prioritize what is the issue that we need to work on. Because your teen can have many areas that you want to work on, but you need to connect with the teen and figure out, okay, this is the thing we're going to work on. Once something has been solved, you found a solution, move on to the next issue or whatever it may be. And then my last principle for parents of teens is work with what is under your control. Many parents are trying to control things that are out of their control. And instead, I invite you to focus on controlling the things that are under your control, and letting go of the other stuff, because it's really not in your control. And I think that's kind of the self-reflective moment parents have when they have teens. They realize that they can't coerce, they can't force, they can't. I mean, if they do, we create a major conflict in the relationship. And then if we realize the limits of our, control, that we really don't have it, but that we can influence our teens, and focusing on the things that is within our control. So for instance, the example we give in the book is, instead of, and I hear this all the time with parents, like, they're on their phone all the time, I'm going to take away their phone. That is not like that phone was given, that process is there, right? What's within your control is to say the phone is going to be parked in the evenings, right? Or as a parent, what's within your control is I turn off the Wi-Fi in the evenings, right? That's within your control. The rest of it has to be natural consequences and part of the learning and development process. So anyway, those are kind of my three principles with parenting teens, because it's a different ballgame from when they are 4, okay? And you have to approach these young adults with that same kind of mutual respect and like act like a coach with your teens rather than as this like enforcer.
Okay, well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is all the information you will need. No, I'm kidding. That was,
No,
man,
I
there was
wish.
so much. Mashallah, even in what you just mentioned, Sister Munira, there was so much content that you just shared that I want to unpack. Because I believe each one of these areas, actually, per my notes, I know that there were 3, but I actually listed out 4 and actually like 4.5. And I want to just spend 2 or 3 minutes double clicking on each one of these, because I think there's a lot of wisdom behind them. The first one is this concept of connection before correction. And what I'm hearing you say is look, you could be reactive as a parent. Reactive meaning, oh, something happens, now I have to, try to go into damage control mode. Or I can be proactive by building a connection with my child. And I'm curious, and I shouldn't say child, I should say my young adult, my young human being. What are some examples of ways that a parent could build a connection with their teenager? What does that actually look like?
So on the basic level, it is creating space where you are spending time together and doing things that the teen enjoys, right? Those are basic connections, right? Basic things like, giving your teen a hug, right? Or asking if they would like a hug. But then there also the verbal part of connection is asking curiosity questions rather than these lose questions, right? So many times, I hear parents are like, why don't they do this? And how come this? And, there's so much exasperation versus I will ask my teens, what's your plan? Like I don't do all the heavy lifting. We have to let our teens do some of the heavy lifting with what's your plan? I see, you got home late today, and I know you mentioned you have a lot of homework. I'm wondering what's your plan, and letting them think about what their plan is. Again, that creates space for connection and collaboration rather than you're so irresponsible. Why did you leave your homework to the last minute? How come this? Your grades that. Like we turn into this lecture naggy parent that our teens completely tune it out. They're just like, are you done? Are you done?
Yeah.
So another tool that we have is 10 words or less. Like whatever statement you need to make, it needs to be 10 words or less, because the lecturing, they get it, right? And if you're like, I don't feel like they're hearing me, I will ask my teens, like, what are you hearing me say? Like, let them spit back to you what they hear you saying, because sometimes there is miscommunication there. And I think the same thing when your teen is sharing something, instead of reacting, you reflect back to them what you hear them saying. I'm hearing you say you're exhausted. I'm hearing you say you didn't plan your time well, or whatever. And you create this conversation where it's not about blame and shame, because nobody wants to feel blamed and shamed when they're, struggling with something, or, as a parent, we are trying to kind of be reflective of life to them, right? We're showing them like your boss wouldn't talk to you that way. Their friends don't talk to them that way. As parents, it's not our role to be doing that, especially young adults, but throughout their childhood.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. So, Sister Munira, I want to tell you, this idea of asking a lose-lose question is something that is real. Oh my goodness, as a parent, like that's real. And even me, when I talk to my dad today, I'll be honest, my dad will do that still. He's like, so where are you on the oil change of your car? Knowing full well that I have not, had a chance to do it, trying to, with the shame. I want to ask you though, when I was 17 or 16, one of the most difficult conversations I ever had was with my dad. And I remember my dad having a honest conversation with me, and it was kind of forceful. And he kind of struck the fear of God in me. He said, Amin, I'm worried that you are fumbling. I'm worried that you are, not, I remember I had a class. It was an English class. I'm not proud of this. I plagiarized, and it was a mistake. And I got a 0 on my final assignment, and I got a B in this class. I'd never gotten a B before. And I remember my dad had a really stern conversation, and he said, Amin, I'm worried that you're fumbling. And I'm worried that this path that you're going down, like realize what that means. And it was really stern. And that's kind of what I needed at that time. I kind of needed my dad to like metaphorically, like, whip me into shape, kind of to say, hey, dude, like, come on, like, this is a big deal. And so I share that to say, I mean, is there a limit to like being friends with our kids? Like, does connection mean that we don't have difficult conversations or give, direct feedback when necessary?
No, not at all. I love the example you just shared, because that's precisely the role parents are taking, right? When we say mentor, it's not friendship, right? A mentor is somebody who's there to guide, to give advice. And I love how your father said, I'm worried, right? It wasn't, what's wrong with you? Why did you do this? How could you? It was more of, I'm worried. I'm worried about the trajectory that this is going to take you on. And yes, our young people do need these hard conversations. Because this is where we talk about this shifting independence and shifting responsibility. That's how we build that, right? So in that moment, you had to take full responsibility for the choice you made, right? And your dad was kind of like unpacking that with you. And that is part of, if we're really raising teens to have, this independence and personal responsibility for their life, we have to reflect back these things that we see. And especially when it comes to like these kinds of values and these kinds of worries that we have as parents, they're going to take it and process it and figure out what they're going to do with that. And you made your own choice after that conversation. And again, that conversation is going to look a little different for every family. So it's not about creating fear, but it is about creating limits and expectations with this kindness, right? It's in positive parenting, we talk about firmness and kindness. It comes
Mm,
together.
yeah.
You have to balance that.
And just a summary, we spoke with Sister Munira, I think your co-author, Noha, and
Mhm.
she talked about firmness and kindness. She was like, brother, I mean, you are too kind. I can tell you are too kind. And she's right. She's like, you need to be firm. And I appreciate this kind of both firmness and kindness together, realizing that the two can exist together. Now, I want to focus on a couple of these other areas because I'm looking at the time. Mashallah, we're having a great conversation. But I am cognizant of the time that we have. You mentioned this idea that teenagers seek to be understood or validated, this idea of empathy. And I think this is a sub bullet within connection, right? So when you're building a connection, we're trying to find ways to actually have meaningful relationships with our kids in ways that they actually want to be or want to connect. Maybe it's through video games, maybe it's through, I don't know, fishing, like playing football, whatever that might be. But you said that teenagers seek to be understood or validated. What does that mean and what does that look like?
Really, it's teenagers and adults. We all seek to be understood. That's just the reality. And what that looks like is when your teen is sharing something, to really hear what they're saying, not how you're interpreting it, right? Or how your judgment is coming on whatever they said. So I think it's really empathizing with them. It has to start from a place of empathy. Like, I can see this is really hard. And just being a sounding board. It's hard for us as when we're raising teens and young adults, it's really hard to hold back our opinions. It's really hard because we have opinions. We've lived a life, right? We know kind of where this is going to go. And yet our teens are in process and they're kind of like figuring out things for the first time. And we're just like, wait, hold up. You need to know this, right? Or you need to think differently about this because this is what I've learned. So it's this really like fine balance of like hearing what they're saying, reflecting it back, letting them process it. Because when we reflect back something to a person, they hear their words sometimes almost differently or in a unique way that makes them kind of go, oh yeah, that's what I was thinking, or that's what I'm saying. Is that really what I'm feeling? Like it's that
Yeah.
process is really important.
And I think the analog that I think about is my conversations with my spouse. Here's what I mean. Um, Sometimes when I am talking about my day with my spouse, or when Sana is talking about her day with me, her goal isn't for me to say, oh, well, this is what you got to do, and this is what you got to do differently. When Sana's telling me about her day, it's just to feel heard. It's literally just to kind of talk it out. And similarly, when I've had a really stressful day, sometimes I'm not actually looking for a solution. Like, yeah, I can figure that out. I just want like a shoulder to lean on. And I think what you're discussing is active listening and being kind of a listener and genuinely trying to listen. As you said earlier, asking curious questions, open-ended questions, and that might be a really great way to do that and validating them. Okay, so now moving on to the second place. You talked about picking your battles. Um, and I wonder if we were to just double click on this real quick. Do you have a perspective on like which battles are worth fighting?
I mean, that's a heavy question because every family is different, right? And every family's priorities and values are different. So, what may be important to me may not be important to another family. So I can't really say like, yes, this is the battle, but I definitely think it's for parents, things that really are key to maybe values, home values, family values, right? Those are things you maybe want to be focusing on, right? There are so many areas, right, that parents want to focus on, right? But it's very hard to kind of do all of them at the same time. But I feel like serious battles, let's say serious challenges like mental health issues, addiction issues, things like that, have to come before, let's say, academics. Okay. Like there has to be a priority of battles, but what a battle is for a family, it's going to look different for every family.
Yeah.
And it's really based on your family values.
And I think truthfully, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that like every all of mankind will be tested, right? With loss of health, loss of wealth and life. In the same way, it kind of feels like, with respect to teenagers, everyone is kind of tested in different ways. And by the way, if you're a parent who's not, experiencing a test, this is an opportunity. You're tested with giving thanks, right? Or, appreciating. And but I think in my kind of looking from the outside in, every family is kind of going through something with respect to teenagers. No one really has it easy. The battles are a little bit different for each one. Now, I want to move into this final piece, which you mentioned, which is work with what is in your control. And this is a fascinating question because, okay, as the father of a 3.5-year-old, I'm like, yo, everything is in my control. If that girl doesn't go to sleep, I can take that away and be firm with her and say no means no. I love you. And that's why you need to go to sleep at 9 p.m. Can't I do that with a 17-year-old too? Like, isn't that still within my control or no?
No. So this is what ends up happening. If we are still in the mindset of when they were 4 and we haven't realized this gradual shift of independence that's happening, it's a surprise for parents when the kid hits 15, 17, right? They realize like, oh, wait, they're not 5 anymore, right? I can't control, their sleeping, their eating, where you couldn't, for a long time, you just didn't realize it. And I think when they are actually vocal and they kind of, are sharing like, I want my autonomy, that's where it becomes this like power struggle. So part of what I invite parents to think about is that this journey, right, of parenting is a slow letting go process. The fact is that some families are not letting go like early enough where they're almost forced to let go by the teen. And if we approach like every milestone in our young person's life as like it's another opportunity for them to build independence, it's another opportunity for them to build independence, when they're 5, and then when they're 9, and when they're 11, and when they're 13, when they're 15 and 17, it's not a like, oh my God, I have to completely let go. It's we've built up to this place of letting go, because we know that ultimately we're going to have to let go, when that is, it's a spectrum, right? But somewhere we want these young people to be independent adults, right? Maybe when they're 20 something, right? In American culture, they have like 18, right? This is all kind of artificial, but the reality is this independence that has to come, it doesn't magically just happen one day. They don't just like get a diploma or get married and it happens. It's a slow like shift in the relationship, the parent-child relationship. And so if you think you have control of certain things or you're coercive with your young person, that's going to backfire. And this is why even in positive parenting, we're talking about collaboration, problem solving. Instead of imposing our values and our way of doing things without having your teen or your young, your child kind of input their opinions and their ideas. If it doesn't happen, we have a battle. And that's a huge conflict because it requires the whole family to shift and realize, oh, we're in a different stage now. I don't have control. And so what's within your control is things within, your home or certain values. And this is where it can get complicated if the teen is not in alignment with the family's values. That's when it starts becoming complicated, because then as a parent, we have to go into more nuanced areas of what is acceptable for me and what is not, right? And that spectrum is very different for every family. But I invite you to not be so rigid and to be open, especially when we talk about Islam, be open to the expansiveness of Islam. Be willing to revisit your ideas.
Yeah. And Sister Munira, I want to so there's a couple of things that you said that I want to focus on and share. So the first thing is realizing this, right? There's this old adage, an idiom. It says, give someone a fish, they'll eat for a day. Teach them how to fish, they'll eat for a lifetime. And this idea of the independence that you are sharing, in that, as this child is growing up, they're gradually on a spectrum becoming more independent. What we have to realize as a parent is not that, um, oh man, this is a necessary evil. This child is becoming independent. I have to like do this, otherwise they're going to rebel. No, we have to frame it as, if we don't allow that child to become independent in a appropriate way, a time is going to come when I am gone and they are alone, where they are not fully developed, where they're not able to, for example, make decisions on their own, or have the ability to stand up for themselves, or say no means no, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So as we are on a quest to, inshallah, raise these children to become the best versions of themselves, we have to realize that giving them independence in an appropriate way is helping them become a wonderful mother or father someday, or a wonderful, contributor to society someday. The second thing that I want to share is this conversation around gradually letting go. Sister Munira, what age does that start? Like, at what age do you gradually start letting go? And do you have like examples of like, where are the areas where a parent should be willing to maybe trade their control early?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think you spoke with Noha on this. Like when they're younger, one of the first battles we see with parents is controlling their food,
Yes.
right? And
No.
that's an early space of, building autonomy. Like a child knows what they like, and there's limits around that, but we have to give them opportunities to make decisions. What do they want to wear? What do they want to eat? Right? There's certain places where they can make decisions. That's letting go. It may not be what you like. You may not like that outfit they're wearing, but it's not the end of the world, right? And so there's those kinds of decisions. And then as they get older, it's like decisions about how they're going to study, let's say, what friends they make. You still have a lot of influence when they're younger in that decision-making process, but giving them opportunities to make decisions, and they're going to make mistakes. And then helping them unpack that and learn from that mistake and decide what they want to do differently. So the letting go is really the mundane stuff that parents kind of don't realize how important these little mundane things are to the eventual letting go. Because what's happening, I see it from the, let's say, high school level, right? Parents are like, no, you're taking this AP class, you're doing this activity, this is not the time for you as a parent to dictate what that teen should be doing. You can advise, you can ask questions, and they ultimately have to start making decisions about, what classes do I want to take? How is this going to lead to, 4 years from now when I graduate? All of these small decisions are leading to that letting go. The ultimate letting
100%.
go,
Yeah.
I'm going to throw this out there, because a lot of Muslim parents even want to choose their child's partner, their spouse. That's the ultimate letting go, right? Like we have to get to a place where we are ceding control. And if you approach parenting from control, it's very painful. It's very painful to let go because you think you must have control. I invite you from a very spiritual place to understand that parenting isn't about control. It's about this journey. It's
Well,
walking this journey with your kids.
so number one, I'm surprised at that because, for me, I met my wife on the wedding. My mom and dad picked. No, I'm kidding. I didn't. But of course, what I did, and I think what you're saying is, there's a role for mom and dad to give advice, to help be a part of the decision making, but not to actually make the decision for somebody, right? And think about that, right? Like, if a parent is making the decision for a life partner, I mean, again, it's not an area where I have a great deal of expertise, but I appreciate the sentiment. Now, peeling back though, right? And you mentioned this. You said the biggest challenge is if there's a misalignment in values. And I think that's the crux of it. We as parents, especially at a young age, through what we do and through the role model that we lead, ideally we're able to inculcate and imbue the values that we seek our children to have. What are examples? If I value prayer and the Quran and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala well, ideally I have inculcated this through the role model that I have set, not just, by saying, hey, read the Quran. No, by me myself demonstrating that and doing that from an early age. Or for example, if I value gratitude and honesty and patience, these are ideas that I have imbued and inculcated over time, right? These are not things that are going to come in the 11th hour when a child is 17 after, as a parent leading a life that has been focused on I don't know, but I don't want to give like bad examples or saying that, a parent was, for example, doing something that was the opposite of gratitude, maybe being a miser or something like that. So, that was a long monologue. I think the headline of the monologue is to say, we as parents have a long-term ability to influence values. And that is at its core, I think the key area where we do want to have control. But again, that control isn't by twisting an arm. It's by, being an example and by, showcasing that on a long-term basis.
And building that relationship. The only way that's going to happen is through that connection and through that like warmth and through that, that family kind of dynamic. So you nailed it. I mean, that's exactly what it is.
Okay, so now as we are preparing to kind of conclude the conversation, I want to explore one final concept, okay? And we touched on this a little bit before, this idea of positive discipline, and you said it's, kindness and firmness. Okay. And we also talked about, look, we should be proactive, focus on building connection before correction. Okay. Let's say there's a time when our teenager does something that requires, the discipline to come out. Okay. Say, for example, we have discovered that, and again, I'm just using an example. I've discovered that, like, my 17-year-old, I found marijuana. All right. Again, example. All right. Like, what does discipline look like in that situation, in your opinion?
Mm-hmm. So part of that is, having this conversation of like, I found, a joint in your room. So I'm going to be checking your room every once in a while, right? Because I'm concerned. I'm concerned that, because of course the teen's going to say, oh, no, that wasn't mine. Or, like there's going to be something there. And so as a parent, what's within my control is to be like, I will be checking your room because I am concerned that you are smoking, marijuana. Seeking help for your teens, right? There is, I invite parents to consider like therapy counseling is a really effective tool, especially when there is conflict in the family or if your teen is struggling. Because some teens, teens that do drugs, let's say, and I share this with parents, like, some of these risky behaviors, right? Are there natural risky behaviors like, driving a little bit too fast, things like that. Like that's the teen trying to figure out their limits. But then there's some risky behaviors, like when it comes to drugs or porn or addictive behaviors, that is an emotional regulation issue, right? This is a child who's having trouble with emotional regulation. And so part of that is them learning new coping skills. And sometimes if a parent hasn't been able to either model coping skills or doesn't know how to help that teen develop coping skills, counseling or therapy is an excellent place for that teen to kind of, revisit this and understand why they're smoking marijuana, right? What are they trying to deal with? Why are they making certain choices? And what new choices and behaviors can they be doing? So
Sister Munira, I really appreciate that discussion. I think that's valuable, and I want to share. So again, full disclaimer: I don't have a teenager. Okay, so I'm trying to think. I'm like, what do parents of teenagers go through? And I'm like, oh, marijuana, right?
a
So
good
like,
one.
for
It's a
example,
good
like
one. It's a huge issue.
so
Yeah.
like my 3.5-year-old, it's like sleep, and I know that's like a real thing, you know. So
Mhm.
but and so like the specifics of marijuana aside, right? Because I hear you, and I hope that our listeners also appreciate the specific guidance on, for example, substance and abuse and things like that, and
Mhm.
it could be related to something else. Okay, and it could be deeper, and there might be a value in seeking, counseling specifically for that.
Mhm.
What I'm like more interested in is just literally that conversation between the parent and the child.
Mhm.
And again, maybe it's not marijuana. Maybe it's like, oh, you came home late, or maybe like
Mhm.
I don't know,
Excellent.
like I can smell girl's perfume on you, or I whatever that might be. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Um, that conversation, where you said, okay, well, I'm going to look at your room, I'm going to look through your room sometimes to just search it. Okay,
Mhm.
then what? Like, so say for example, I were to find a joint, or say for example, I were to find that child, or sorry, that teenager is participating in inappropriate behavior again.
Mhm.
Then what? Like, you know
Right.
like, what do I
So
do?
so part of the conversations that you're talking about is that this is what we're talking about, the collaboration, right? So coming up with, what is the solution to what's going on here, right? So this is that pick your battles thing, right? So let's say the battle is, there one battle, like, okay, the curfew battle, right? It's very kind of clear cut, right? We come to an understanding of like, what time do you think is appropriate? These are our family rules. This is what I think is appropriate for you to get home by 11. What is the consequence if you don't? And usually you ask the teen to come up with a consequence. What you'll find is that the teens are actually a lot more hard on themselves than parents even will be. So there is this thing in positive discipline. We have logical consequences. So you find something that's logically connected to, if this, then that. It's a logical connection, not an illogical connection, like it has nothing related to what just happened. And then there's natural consequences. You don't have to do anything because naturally something happens, right? And that natural consequence of like being tardy the next day at school, that's a natural consequence of oversleeping because you came home too late, right? And they have to live with that consequence and they have to work through it. So those are kind of two approaches as far as like, I don't, parents want to go into punishment mode, right? And that's not what I'm advocating at all. I am saying that every choice a teen makes, there's going to be a logical consequence or a natural consequence. Ideally, there's a natural consequence. Ideally, that's where we kind of want our kids to feel the ramifications of their decisions. But some things need a logical consequence, like the marijuana, right? So the logical consequence is the conversation that the parent and the teen are going to have. Like, every time I sense that, I smell smoke on you, or I want you to take a drug test every week, those can be logical consequences that as a family you are coming up with, because I am concerned. You can invite the teen to go to family therapy with you. You can invite the teen to go see the school counselor. There's, we can talk about, what apps we're going to put on the phone, because you're concerned about their location. I mean, there are things within your control as a parent. You have to be creative and collaborate with the teen to say, I am concerned. I don't want you smoking marijuana. And the problem, especially let's say with marijuana, you have teens that are like, oh, it's not that bad, right? Or it's legal now, right? Like so it's not about a rational decision, right? This is about saying our family values is that we don't do this in our house. That's within my control. We don't do this in my house. I
Mm.
wish that you don't do this. And if I sense that maybe you are smoking, I'm going to, request that you do a drug test, and I'm going to request whatever. You choose what your consequences are going to be that are going to be helpful.
I hear you, and I think the uh what I heard you say is, number one, we have to realize that in order for us to get to the outcome that we are desiring as a parent, the most strategic approach is to be collaborative. So that is, if we take an approach that is just 100% punitive, where we just punish them, we may not actually get to the desired outcome that we want. Okay, so for example, in the marijuana situation, I could punish the child, but is that going to actually get to the desired outcome of that child stopping to smoke marijuana, right? If I instead took an approach that was collaborative, that said, hey, look, let's have a conversation about this. What's going on? Why did you do this? Trying to, go through this idea of connection, from there building a consequence to say, look, these are the rules of the road here. This is what we can do. This is, and having that conversation, say, I'm very disappointed. That strategy or that line of thinking has a higher likelihood of being effective long term. Is that right?
Yes. And that's the goal, right? Because when we approach with punishment, it's a short-term thing. What ends up happening if you don't have that connection and you just punish, you're like, you're grounded, right? Or you may never go out. The kid is going to rebel further. They're going to say, oh, I'm going to do it behind their back. Let me figure out how I need to do this because I'm not listening to what the parent wants. That's why
it's just so interesting, Sister Munira, because like the idea of punishment, it's like, man, it's like 1 + 1 = 2. Like that's like the way I was kind of ingrained, I feel like. And I also feel like it's interesting because we use the word consequence, but we don't use the word punishment. And what I take away from that is the overall idea of the consequences tied to the action. It's related to, a cooperative type of a approach, whereas punishment is kind of one-sided. There isn't an ability to kind of explore it and really come to a more robust solution. And I really appreciate this dialogue because I imagine for a number of parents, this may be valuable. And so, having said that, the teenage years are a unique set of years, and there are so many things that are happening with respect to the development of a child, like we discussed, along with all of the other external forces that our children are exposed to. And so I thank you, Sister Munira, so much for joining us today and imparting your wisdom that you had to share. And I make sincere prayer that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps each of us through our journey in being a parent, such that we are able to raise our children, especially through this unique period in time. And full disclaimer, I don't have a teenager yet. And so I hope and I pray that this experience, especially as we talk through it, is one that we'll be able to manage through with success. So Sister Munira, thank you so much. Positive Parenting in a Muslim Home is a essential read for every Muslim parent. It is a really, really outstanding work. And Sister Munira and her co-author, Noha, are like not just educated, but they've experienced, right? It's interesting because you talk about knowledge and wisdom. Wisdom is oftentimes gained over time and experience. And I think what I really appreciate about the conversation that, Sister Munira and I just had is, it's one thing to, share theoretically, well, this is what you should do, but actually having gone through the experience, working with families that have gone through these actual situations and, being able to take those learnings and turn that into a book, this is literally what they've done. And so it's an essential resource. It's one that we as a Muslim community are really blessed to have. And, having said that, it reminds me of just how honored I am that Sister Munira, you're on this podcast with us. So thank you so much. And for the book, is the best place to get it on Amazon? Is that the best place to get it? All right, very good. It's called Positive Parenting in the Muslim Home.